Thankfully, most of these little things are all more or less working routinely. And if they don't, at least I know usually what to do to fix it. Far cry from the early days of having to Zoom all of this. All right, that is up and running. Yay. Just give me a second. All right, looks like we're doing all right. We're going to wait just a minute. I do have a 7 o'clock meeting today, so I have to make sure that we can finish in time. So I don't want to wait too long to start. Okay. All right, I think that is a reasonable little buffer. Let's go ahead and get down to our studying. So tonight we are continuing in what essentially has been a three-part series, well, four if you count Pesach ahead of it, moving through the celebration of Pesach into the holidays in between, into the counting of the Omer and the holiday of Shavuot as it approaches. And during our class on Shavuot, we talked about the book of Ruth and the idea that Ruth is really the paradigm of a person who accepts Torah and becomes attached to Judaism. She is the most explicit and formal example of a person converting to Judaism. As such, it seems appropriate that we continue in that theme by looking at how does conversion actually happen. Now, some of my students that are in this class are already Jewish. Some of them are people who have converted in the past. Some of them are people who are interested in pursuing conversion in the future. This idea of conversion, however, is not only of pragmatic interest. It reflects a great deal of the essential values and principles of Judaism that should be understood and used to infuse our daily life, whether we were raised Jewishly, born Jewish, but came to an observant life later, or attracted to Judaism from outside. So this topic is not only for those on the pathway of conversion, but is really a topic for all of us. Unfortunately, there is a great deal of confusion about conversion. Some of that is because many people have begun to treat Judaism as though it was simply an ethno-nationalist club, and that would be a problem. No matter how much I may want to be Japanese, no matter how much I want to learn Japanese or absorb Japanese culture, I don't especially, although I did enjoy my time there, I can never actually be ethnically Japanese. Simply by virtue of birth and DNA, it is going to be something that I will always have a barrier between me and being fully involved within that culture. I can get a lot closer than I currently am, and closer even than when I lived there, but there is a barrier that comes at the end. Judaism is not like that, as we will discuss in much more detail, but I want to make sure that you understand that there are many people who don't understand. There are many people who treat Judaism as though it were the same as any other ethnicity or nationality, and that is simply incorrect. Judaism has never been purely an ethnicity, nor has it ever been purely a nationality, although certainly some ethnic aspects and some national aspects have been very important in shaping Judaism as it currently exists over the last 3,000 years. There is also a great deal of conversion over Judaism because, well, the state of Israel has its own political system, which must also deal with the question of conversion, both internally and conversion of people abroad, as this will influence their relationship to that state. And I don't mean their emotional and spiritual relationship, I mean their literal political immigration status relationship. And we will talk about that eventually too. But I just want you to understand that whatever the policies of the state of Israel, Medinat Yisrael, to whom we wish a happy birthday on this Yom HaAtzmaut, this day celebrating its independence, whatever its laws may be regarding conversion, those are not necessarily Jewish laws. Those are Israeli, political, secular state laws. They are not reflective of Judaism in and of itself. But we will talk about that when we reach that point. So with that very long introduction, let's get down to work of what is conversion. So conversion is when someone who was not already Jewish becomes Jewish. Pretty simple, right? How that happens is where it gets a little bit more complicated. But first, let's make sure we understand what does it mean to become Jewish. To become Jewish means that he or she is now bound to God exclusively, and that is God as reflected in the Jewish understanding, that they are bound to Torah as their path and guidance of life, and that they are bound to the Jewish people as an extended family. And we're going to look at all three of those in more detail. So a convert has to give up all belief and all practices associated with any other religion they may have once practiced in their life. That means if you were raised Christian or practiced Christianity at some point, once you become Jewish, you may no longer engage in Christmas. You may no longer take communion, may no longer celebrate Easter. Same if you were Muslim, you can no longer celebrate Ramadan or any other holiday associated with any other religion that you may have had. Now, it's a little bit more complicated when it comes time to still be involved in your extended family's life. And usually there are exceptions made for attending when other people are celebrating. For example, if your uncle, who is not Jewish because you have become Jewish and he did not, is celebrating Christmas, to be there and to notice that they are celebrating and even to wish them well is by most authorities perfectly fine. If, on the other hand, there is extreme and undue pressure by that family to pull you back into their faith, then usually it would be better to go the day before or after their holidays rather than on those days themselves. But that's something that's handled on a case-by-case basis. And if you have questions, please talk to me. You cannot engage in the communion, the worship of saints, the turning towards Mecca, or any of the other practices of the religion. There is no concept that is carried over as well. So the concept of the Trinity, the worship at shrines, the belief in other prophets or other gods are very clearly not allowed once a person becomes Jewish. And that means that this must be an emotional decision prior to the conversion. The person must be prepared to abandon all of these earlier beliefs and practices. Come on, there we go. And in place, they need to absorb and adhere to the Torah alone. And now a righteous Gentile, somebody who is non-Jewish but is living a good life, can believe in God and can believe in God alone. Right? You don't, it's not only Jews and only idol worshipers. There is a large group of the middle, more and more in the modern world, thankfully, that believe in God, but they're not Jewish. And that's fine according to Judaism. Judaism is perfectly happy with people who want to believe that there is a God, a single God, and only God, but they have no interest in becoming Jewish. We celebrate that, we support them in any way we can, and we say, good job. If that person wants to call themselves Jewish, if they actually want to be Jewish, rather than just worshiping God in their own way, then they have to accept the Torah. They have to accept the Torah, the covenant that was given at Sinai, which we celebrate on Shavuot, as the foundation for how to actually live according to God's commandments. Now, this means including both the written and oral Torah, and understanding that they are essential to how we fulfill the mitzvot. There's much more of this that I discussed back in the early classes of this cycle. It also means that they have to be prepared to study and engage in honest, good faith debate as what is necessary in order to properly understand. Judaism does not say that a person sits alone and studies and then is divinely inspired to understand the commandments. No, a person sits in conversation with others and wrestles with them as well as the text in order to best understand. And that means that you are not at liberty to interpret the Torah entirely on your own, at least not so far as the conservative or Orthodox movements are concerned. So if you wish to become Jewish, it is not simply enough to attach yourself to God alone. You must also attach yourself to God through the gift of Torah. And that means following the way the Torah has been followed, the oral, written Torah, through lively and very lengthy debate. And you're not only getting that, but wait, there's more. You've accepted God, you've accepted the Torah, you've also got to think about the rest of us. And now Judaism does not say that you should only think about other Jews, that you should only focus on the Jewish people. However, we do see ourselves as linked more closely to each other than to non-Jews. This is best expressed in the metaphor of a family. Members of a family will look after each other and will usually look after each other with a little bit more emphasis than they would with others. That does not mean, however, that the family members don't care about other things around them. And indeed, in Judaism, we are taught to care for not only Jews, but also non-Jews, whether they be in our city, country, or the world. So having this connection to Jews is very important. And we see this played out in many different forms. We belong to synagogues in order to be part of a community. We give tzedakah to help Jews in need, whether it be in the local, national, or global positions. And we support the state of Israel, and we defend its right to exist and to be prosperous. But we can, of course, criticize as well. In fact, criticizing Jewish institutions, whether they be a local synagogue or the state of Israel, is a very long Jewish pastime. And you will find throughout our history that Jews have been very good at criticizing ourselves and our groups, because that is part of the debate I mentioned in the previous slide. So even on Yom HaAtzmaut, we can still mention that Israel is not perfect, our synagogue is not perfect, the Federation of Orlando is not perfect, and that does not detract in any way, shape, or form from our commitment to them. In fact, one only criticizes what one cares about. I don't level criticisms at sports teams because most of them are not that important to me. So we focus on giving that criticism lovingly, we focus on supporting each other, and we allow that support for each other to provide a safe place, a safe reassurance that then lets us go out into the world to do good for others beyond that immediate circle as well. So questions or comments so far? All right, I'm not seeing anybody unmute or raise their hand, so let's go ahead and carry on. So conversion is not something that gets a lot of explicit discussion within the Tanakh, within the Bible. However, we do get one person who gets a lot of attention, who is a famous convert, which, as I mentioned, is Ruth. The famous statement of Ruth's commitment comes in the beginning of the book, where Ruth replies to Naomi, who was seeking to send Ruth back to her home in Moab, "Do not urge me to leave you, to turn back and not follow you. For wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. Thus and more may the Lord do to me, if anything but death parts me from you." An incredible statement of categorical, wholehearted, sincere commitment to belonging to not only Torah and God, but also to the Jewish people. And in fact, that statement is something that our sages, back in Ruth Rabbah and other passages, used as a starting point to unpack what does it mean to convert. So as you may know from some of my other classes where we talk about the unique interpretive traditions of Midrash, we see a few words or a phrase being expanded into its implications. So I will try to model that for you over the next few passages. Ruth replied, "Do not urge me to leave you." That's our quote. What does urge, in that context, literally it could have been interpreted as meaning hurt, mean? What does that mean? What does it mean? The implication is Ruth said to Naomi, "Do not sin against me by telling me to leave and return from following you. I intend to convert anyway, and it is better that I do it with you than with someone else." So those little phrases, "do not urge me to leave you," is don't hurt me by making me leave, because you will only be preventing me temporarily from joining Judaism. And that is a damage to me that is completely unnecessary. Then, what is the response? When Naomi heard this, she immediately began to lay out before her the laws of conversion. Naomi said, "My daughter, Jewish women do not go to the non-Jews' theaters and circuses." Remembering in the ancient world, their theaters and circuses were gladiatorial fights and other places of murder, mayhem, and licentiousness, and were not appropriate for Jews. Modern theaters and circuses are not the same. But in the ancient world, it would be a place to stay. How does Ruth respond to this implied statement of fact? Ruth said, "Where you go, I will go." Meaning, I accept that. If there are limits on where you can go, then I accept those limits on myself too. Naomi said, "My daughter, Jewish women do not live in a house where there is no mezuzah." Right? We need to have a mezuzah up on the wall because that is part of Judaism. Ruth said, "Where you lodge, I will lodge." Again, interpreting that phrase to be an implied response to what Naomi had said between the lines. And we would, of course, only live in a place with a mezuzah. "Your people shall be my people" refers to warning and punishment, meaning I will follow the laws of your people, and if I don't, I will be liable for whatever punishments there are. And "your God shall be my God." This is a summary referring to the rest of the mitzvot. Excuse me. Oh, skipped one. Naomi said to her, "It is prohibited for us to go beyond the Sabbath limit." Ruth responded, "Where you go, I shall go." Again, interpreting that phrase from the book of Ruth as a response to an implied statement. Different than the last one, talking about circuses in the previous page, but again, showing how in this small phrase, much could have been implied. It is forbidden to us to be alone together with a forbidden man. You're not allowed to have a private tete-a-tete with somebody for whom you're prohibited to be with. "Where you lodge, I shall lodge." Naomi said to her, "We are commanded 613 mitzvot. Your people are my people." Naomi said to her, "Idolatrous worship is forbidden to us. Your God is my God." Naomi said to her, 4 types of capital punishment were handed over to a court. Realize that there is death sentences for some of the commandments. Ruth responded, "Where you die, I shall die." Naomi said to her, 2 burial grounds were handed over to the court, one for those executed for more severe crimes and another for less severe crimes. And Ruth responded, "And there I shall be buried." Meaning that if I am to become Jewish, I will follow your laws. And if I fail to, I will accept the punishment. And if that punishment be execution because of my crime, I accept the execution and the burial that will go with it. Again, trying to show that there was a concise conversation between Naomi and Ruth to establish for Ruth exactly what it means to become Jewish. Becoming Jewish is not simply a statement of desire. It is a commitment to be bound by the commandments. And at different times, that has meant the community has had greater or lesser authority to punish, but we have always been responsible, even if the community does not have the capacity to mete out a capital punishment in the modern world, meaning that a person is committing to Judaism and committing to be liable for those laws. Now, this is a little different than some of the other conversions a person might make. For example, if a person prepares to convert from single to married, before they're actually married, there is no problem if they have a transgression. Once they're married, obviously it is. On the other hand, if somebody is converting from non-citizen to citizen, if you live in a country, you are obligated to the laws of that country, whether you are a citizen or not. Once you convert, once you become a citizen, then, of course, you are still liable for those laws. And Judaism is more like the first case, that a person who is planning on converting is not responsible for the rules yet, but when you have converted, all that responsibility comes. And one more text from Ruth. Rabbi Elazar said, "What is the verse from which this ruling, that we are not over-demanding of converts and do not over-teach, where is that derived? As it is written, and when she saw that she was steadfastly minded to go with her, she left off speaking with her." So he's interpreting the idea that we give a selection, a smorgasbord, if you'll allow me to borrow from Scandinavia, of what the commandments are, a general summary. We do not expect the convert to know each and every single detail of each and every single mitzvah. Instead, we strive for a summary. Now, indeed, that summary has changed over time, and the response to those who come to convert has changed over time. And that is because the situation of our communities has changed over time. So allow me to give a few examples. During the time of King David, well, the sages taught converts are not accepted in the days of the Messiah. Similarly, they did not accept converts in the days of King David or in the days of King Solomon. The issue there was that somebody might be converting during those times purely for the benefit of being part of a powerful and successful kingdom. And that is not a proper motivation for conversion. A person can still be righteous without being Jewish. If you want to be Jewish, it has to be because you are attracted to Judaism itself, not because you think the citizenship within the kingdom of David or kingdom of Solomon will bring benefit. And so conversion wasn't allowed at all during that time period. During the Roman period, conversion was allowed, and there were many who came and converted to Judaism, despite the way Jews were treated during that period. There were many wars of Rome against the Jews, and there were many periods of persecution against us. Nevertheless, many people still found that Judaism was a far more spiritually and personally satisfying path than the paganism of Rome. During the Middle Ages, things flipped a little bit again. In both Christian and Muslim countries, we were forbidden from accepting converts. And that would be penalty of death, meaning the rabbi who conducted the conversion, the community that allowed it, there could be serious reprisals from the Christian and Muslim authorities. And so, by and large, we stopped accepting converts because of the danger that they posed. And that meant that there was a long period of being extremely suspicious, because a person who was coming to convert might be a spy. They might be pretending as a test for the local authorities to see if there was a pretense for the authorities to move against us. Conversions did still happen. They were far fewer and much more secretive, but by and large, conversion stopped for many centuries because of the persecutions that we faced. And that meant that the bar was much higher for those that were interested in order to get past that suspicion born out of persecution. So now, what do? How do we handle it today? Because we're not living in the days of King David, and we're not in the days of Mashiach, the Messiah, either, unfortunately. We're not living in the days of Rome, and we're not living in the days of the Middle Ages. So how do we handle it now? Well, we still handle it with the basic pieces that have always been at the core. There's only been one major change, which is how we handle part two. Part one, no change. If the person is a man, they must be circumcised, have what is called Brit Milah. If they are already medically circumcised, meaning they were circumcised purely for medical purposes, either as a child or as an adult, then we still have a procedure where we take a drop from the place, and that procedure is called Hatafat Dam Brit. And this is a way of symbolically representing the circumcision of Milah, of the Brit, of the covenant, even if there is no longer a skin to contribute. Part two, the convert must accept the obligation of the commandments, the ol hamitzvot, the yoke of the commandments, and this must be done before a beit din, before a tribunal that has been convened for that purpose, in order that it can be public knowledge and part of the public record that indeed they have agreed to follow the commandments and that their agreement has been accepted by the community. And then third, as the final part of conversion, they must be immersed, they must be dunked in living water. Now, living water source, what we call a mikveh, is one of two things. It is either a special bath-like area that has had natural water collected in a particular way. The laws are a little bit confusing, so we're not going to go into them just right now. And then that water can be used for conversion. Or the person can go into a naturally flowing body of water, whether it be an ocean, a lake, or a river, or something like that, and that can serve as a mikveh as well. Now here, if somebody is converting in Central Florida, we are very fortunate. The congregation Ohev Shalom allows the local community to use its mikveh. We give a small nominal fee to help support the mikvah's upkeep, and that allows us to have a private and much warmer year-round mikveh for years. And we're going to go into these in a little bit more detail. So let's talk about Brit Milah, about circumcision. Circumcision is essential, and it is a non-negotiable component of conversion. Again, as somebody is able to be a righteous and perfectly good person without becoming Jewish, we are in a position to say that if they cannot meet these requirements, that they cannot become Jewish. We are not damning them. We are not forcing them to live a life of sin. We are simply saying that to be Jewish, you have to meet these requirements. And since the beginning, with Abraham, circumcision has been a requirement. Now, many babies who are not Jewish are circumcised in the United States for perceived medical and family preferences. And that's perfectly fine. And in fact, it's made my life a lot easier when somebody wants to convert because they already had that procedure done. And hatafat dam brit is much easier. Drawing that drop of blood from the site of the circumcision is much easier than an adult circumcision. But adult circumcisions are possible, can take place. And if you are in need of having that arranged, please contact me to give you the advice.
Rabbi.
Yes.
I was going to comment that I took a class on conversion, and there are situations, which is very rare, that is an elderly adult that wants to convert, but due to medical reasons, they cannot perform the circumcision. Like, let's say that they're 95 and it's medically advisable, they cannot do the circumcision, then they circumvented and they perform the conversion under those extreme circumstances that the person cannot go through the medical procedure of circumcision.
So I have not heard of that extenuating circumstance being accepted within the conservative movement, but there are many different opinions. So I would need to investigate that further. So far in my own experiences, I've never had a person who was medically unable to have a circumcision. And so it's been more of a hypothetical discussion. But I would have to look into it. But as I said, I'm not aware of the conservative movement accepting that leniency under those circumstances. Now, as Shulchan Aruch gives us as our summary at the bottom, a convert that enters to join the Jewish people is obligated in circumcision. If he was already circumcised when he was an idol worshiper, or he was born circumcised, which is a rare but real medical state, it's necessary to draw blood from it and not bless on it, meaning there is no bracha, there is no blessing said for the ceremony of hatafat dam brit. Were it not for the blood of the covenant, the heaven and earth would not be able to stand. So this is one of the spiritual pillars that is behind the concept of Brit Milah. As it says, were it not for my Brit, for my covenant, day and night, I would not have placed the laws of heaven and earth. So what Jeremiah is trying to say here, according to our tradition, is that it is through the covenant, specifically through the covenant of circumcision, which is the most physical reminder of the covenant of Torah, that we recognize that God did not make the world just to have a terrarium, just to have a place for little animals to run around, but so that there would be a spiritual path, which would include Judaism, which would eventually lead to Mashiach, to a time of Messiah and an end to suffering for all people. So this concept of Brit Milah and its centrality within Judaism is part of the reason for the world going on and the world being made in the first place. Now, accepting commandments, this is both very small and very big. It's very small, as we'll see, because how much you have to accept and how you accept is a little bit confusing, but it's also very big because it is key. A person can physically be circumcised, a person can physically be immersed in the mikveh, a person could even have those two things done against their will, God forbid. But accepting the commandments, the ol hamitzvot, the yoke of the commandments, that is a personal choice. And that is something that needs to be taken very seriously by the individual. The person has to imagine that without being Jewish, they simply would feel incomplete. And that means that they have to accept the mitzvot of Judaism. A person, like I've said, can be connected to God, but to be connected to God through the Torah and the mitzvot, that requires a particular form of acceptance. Now, like we saw with Ruth, the convert has to accept all that goes with the commandments, the limits and the requirements. They must also accept that the community will decide many of the details according to their leadership and traditions. As I said before, the individual is not free to just read the Torah and come to their own conclusions. Read the Torah, absolutely. That's actually a requirement, but read the Torah and discuss, and the application will be according to the community and our traditions based upon our leadership. That is built into the Torah itself. The Torah does tell us that we must go to our leaders, but sometimes people seem to forget that. Now, the part where it gets a little bit more fuzzy is that accepting the yoke doesn't mean the convert has to know every detail of every commandment. There is not going to be a 613-page test where a person has to outline every detail of every possible permutation of every possible commandment. Nor does it mean that the person has to swear that they will never make a mistake or sin. All of us make mistakes and sin, which is exactly why God gave us tshuva, repentance, and why God gave us Yom Kippur as a day for final atonement. But a convert must fully accept the commandments, that they are commandments, and that he or she will try as hard as possible to keep them to the best of their knowledge, to the best of their ability. And that last part is rather essential, that you are not committing to expertise, but you are committing to a certain form of attempt, of devotion, of passion. And that is what the rabbis were talking about when they said that you would teach them not too much, but enough. And in fact, the idea of how they have to be informed, of how much they need to be informed, well, that's changed over time. Here from the Talmud, also from Yevamot, the example is given as follows. And they inform him of some of the lenient mitzvot and some of the stringent mitzvot, and they inform him of the sin of gleanings and forgotten sheaves and of corners, and about the poor man's tithes. These are all agricultural mitzvot designed to help the poor in the community. And they inform him of the punishment for the mitzvot. For example, they say to him, be aware that before you came to the status and converted, had you eaten forbidden fat, you would not be punished by karet, a spiritual excision. And had you profaned Shabbat, you would not be punished by stoning. But now, if you have eaten forbidden fat, you are punished by karet. And if you have profaned Shabbat, you are punished by stoning. There are many details of how such crimes are punished and under what circumstances, but that's a whole nother conversation. But what they're trying to say is that you give the person a short summary of some of the commandments, make sure they recognize that there are rules, and make sure that they recognize that there are punishments. Once they've got that, boom, right? As it continues to say, and just as they inform him of the punishment of the mitzvot, so too they inform him about the reward granted for them. They say to him, Be aware that the world to come is made only for the righteous. And the Jewish people at the present time are unable to receive abundance of good and an abundance of woe. So, and basically saying there will be a reward in the future, in the world to come. However, at the moment, this was during Roman times, you should understand right now we're not exactly going to be sitting pretty. Any rewards in this world are definitely delayed under all of the misery that we endure. However, we will endure, and we will eventually be able to reach better days. So they try to explain the general pattern of reward. And they do not overwhelm him with threats, and they are not exacting with him about the details of the mitzvot. If he accepts upon himself all of these ramifications, then they circumcise him immediately. Once he recovers, you go to the mikveh, the beit din and the mikveh, and we're done. So as you can see, the Talmud envisions this conversation, this period of preparation, as being pretty much one sit-down conversation. I can't give you exactly how long it would have been, but it would not be a year long, 3 years long, 5 years long. This would have been one longish conversation and explanation. Of course, with the person having prepared themselves probably for the idea before they came in the first place. But ultimately, we are not talking about dropping an encyclopedia on a person, but instead giving the general outline. Now, those of you who have been studying with me will know this is not quite how we do it today. It takes a lot longer than one conversation with me before I will accept a person to convert. And there are a number of different reasons for that. One is because it is simply the tradition. The tradition has become to take at least around a year for a person to prepare themselves. But I have also found in my personal experience that it provides a person time to transform their understanding of themselves, their community, and their world according to Judaism, so that when they make that final commitment to Judaism, they feel as though they are fully prepared for what they have undertaken. For a person to have one extended conversation and then jump into Judaism, it would be overwhelming, and they would struggle to find their place within the community as they went on. So technically, it could be done in this very quick fashion, and certainly within the days of the Talmud and other times, it probably was very appropriate given the ability to be immersed within a community and grant support from all sides. But nowadays, we take a little bit more of a slow bake approach. Now, you may have also heard that there is a custom of pushing someone off who is looking for conversion. And indeed, this goes back to the time when conversions were not always fully upfront and honest. And we would not need to make them convert. And so we would make sure, go away, think about this. Are you really sure? We would test their commitment by gently pushing them away. In the Talmud, however, it's not talking about pushing away 3 times or some other formal number. It describes it as this: a convert who comes to convert, at the present times they say to him, "What did you see that you come to convert? Don't you know that the Jewish people at the present time are anguished, suppressed, despised, and harassed, and hardships are visited upon them?" If he says, "I know, and I am unworthy," they accept him immediately. That's it. That was all they were looking for his willingness, that he understood that being Jewish was no cakewalk, especially back then. Even today, it is still most of the hate crimes that are committed in the United States are committed against religious hate crimes against people in the United States are committed against Jews, despite our very small numbers. It's still quite hard to be Jewish, even in a country as free and protected as the US. And really, if a person is willing to come to Judaism knowing that, that is all of the commitment that I need. If a person recognizes that Judaism is not necessary, that we are not demanding, and that we respect their right to stay not Jewish, yet they wish to be Jewish anyway, despite the difficulties and burdens and hardship that will bring, along with the pleasures and blessings, then yes, that is enough of a commitment. And so, speaking personally, I do not feel a need to formally reject a person any number of times, as long as they understand what they are getting into. Additionally, a person is going to have ample time to back out when they work with me for conversion, because they can quit at any time they feel that it is not appropriate for them. But do we examine their motivation? Well, yes, kind of. So as we talked about before, we want the person to be coming for the right reason. This is why we didn't accept converts during the time of King David and King Solomon, during the glory of their kingdoms. As it says, when a convert comes to convert, check. Perhaps it's because of money he took. Maybe somebody bribed him, or perhaps of power that she'll gain, right? She thinks that if she becomes Jewish, she's going to have more authority in the community. Or because of fear. Maybe she thinks that the Jews will persecute her, or maybe she thinks God doesn't love her because she's not Jewish. Right? Those are all mistaken reasons for converting. And if they have placed their eyes on a Jew to wed, well, that's another issue, right? If somebody is only converting because they want to get married, not because they also love Judaism, but only because they wish to get married, then that's also an issue. And if you do not find such a cause, inform them of the weight of the yoke of the Torah, all of the mitzvot that we talked about, and the difficulty of fulfilling it on the nations of the world, in order that they leave. And if they accept and do not leave, and you see that they are returning out of love, accept them. So that is the basic idea. But you might say, yeah, but what happens, Rabbi, if somebody converts and you didn't realize they had a hidden agenda? Maybe they lied. Maybe they hid the real reason they were converting. All right, don't worry, the Shulchan Aruch, from which the first section was taken as well, explains. And if you did not check after him, and you did not inform him of the rewards of the commandments and their punishments, and he was circumcised and immersed before 3 ordinary people, this is a convert. Right, let me make sure you understand the legal ramifications here. If you did everything wrong in conversion, except he got circumcised and he was immersed in a mikvah, and there was a Beit Din, these people who were there for the conversion, then the conversion sticks, even if you are informed that it is because of something, like those discussed before, that he converted. Even if you find out he was bribed to convert, even if you find out he was blackmailed to convert, if he did it of his own free will in some respect, then, since he was circumcised and immersed, he has left the category of idol worshippers, and we are worried for him until his righteousness is clarified. Yes, we do check and make sure that he is indeed going to legitimately be with Judaism, but even if he returns and serves idols, he is like an apostate Israelite. He is still our brother. He's just not doing a great job of being Jewish at the time. And that happens to all sorts of people that might have that issue. So yes, it is maybe hard to believe that even if we were misinformed, that we would still accept the person after the fact. But this is a very important point in Jewish law, which is that once there has been a status change for a person, once there has been a movement of their identity, that we must say that it is finished, finito, done, or else there will always be a cloud of suspicion hanging over a person, not only with regards to conversion, but also with regards to something like a divorce. We need to make sure that people recognize that once it is done, and that is not going to be re-examined. Again, the person who converts under false pretenses may drift away from Judaism, God forbid, but until they do, we are not constantly worried that they might. Instead, we accept that they are Jewish. And if they do, we still accept that they're Jewish. We just don't think they're doing a very good job of it right now. Just like somebody who might be a member of your family, a brother or sister or such, if they never come to the birthdays, if they are never there for the celebrations, if they are never there for the difficult times, they're still part of the family. They're not a very good part, they're not a very active part, but they are still a part. And thus, we cannot deny that they are part of the family. And in Judaism, that extends to those who choose to become Jewish. Any questions before we move on to how conversions work when there is a child involved? Okay, then let's go ahead and deal with that topic. A minor, a child who is a non-Jew. If he has a father, the father can convert him, or his mother, because it is a merit to him. And we can give a merit to him outside of his choice. This is the same reason why we can educate a child and why we can also make them brush their teeth and take them to the doctor and get them vaccines. We can give them benefit even if the child is not able to consent, or if the child even doesn't want to consent because the child doesn't understand. So an adult can convert the child. And indeed, this happens on a fairly regular basis in the modern world, either because of IVF, adoption, or of interfaith marriages. We often do child conversions in order to normalize the child's status as being fully Jewish. Whether he is a minor who is converted on behalf of his father, or whether he was converted by a court, very rare circumstance, when he is older, he can protest his conversion. We don't treat him the way we would treat an adult convert, meaning if the child grows up and decides that they would not want to be Jewish anymore, technically at that moment of his maturity, he has that decision. Unlike an adult, which, as I said in the previous page, once they are Jewish, there is no exit. He is not like an apostate, rather like a non-Jew. And what is this talking about? Very important condition. As soon as one becomes an adult and acts in accordance with the practices of Israel, he can no longer protest, meaning his conversion. So if he lives for even just one part of one day, having reached that day of maturity, bar mitzvah age, as we might call it in casual conversation, he is now Jewish forever. He doesn't get to renounce his Judaism later. He gets one moment to renounce it. If that moment passes, then now he is Jewish for all time. And if he decides to renounce his Judaism later, he would be treated as an apostate, as someone who has abandoned Judaism, but not like a non-Jew. And again, this is to remove that cloud of suspicion so that a child or a young person or even older person who we know was converted as a child, we are no longer worried that they may abandon Judaism, because that is no longer an option, or at least rather no option that is different for them than anyone else. Technically, of course, anybody can stop practicing Judaism. It's not a good thing, but it's always a possibility for anyone. And a person who does so, whether they were converted or whether they were born Jewish, their status is the same. They're just not doing a very good job right now. Now, immersion is that final step. So just as the Israelites immersed before receiving Torah at Sinai, which is something that we talk about on Shavuot, so too converts must immerse. And they must immerse immediately. And two Torah scholars stand over him and inform him of some of the lenient mitzvot and some of the stringent mitzvot. Sounds familiar. Once he has immersed and emerged, he is like a Jew in every sense. For a woman, seat her in the water up to her neck, and two Torah scholars stand outside, meaning they can hear that she is immersing, and there is a woman inside who is helping to make sure that it happens correctly, but by protecting modesty. And from there, they inform her of some of the lenient mitzvot and some of the stringent mitzvot. Both a convert and an emancipated slave, in the same place that a menstruating woman immerses, there a convert and emancipated slave also immerses. So this is what the ruling regarding the living water. This is a universal place that is used for multiple things, not only for conversions, but also for the monthly cycle, as well as for in the ancient world when an emancipated slave would also be converted to Judaism. And anything that interposes between one's body and the water of the ritual bath of the mikveh with regard to immersion, it also interposes, meaning invalidates the immersion for a convert and for an emancipated slave and for a menstruating woman, which is why when we have the conversion, we have to prepare ourselves before going into the mikveh. That means that you have to wash and clean very well before going to the mikveh. You don't want to have bits of dirt and mud caked on your body, which is a barrier between the water and that part of the skin. A person removes all jewelry, all hairbands, any makeup they're wearing. I can't give an example for myself for that. Any hair extensions, any piercings, any bandages, anything. Now, if you can't, for example, if you have a cast on your arm, then we postpone the immersion until the cast comes off. But all the other things which can be removed are removed. The person then, wearing nothing at all, goes completely under the water and they lift their feet so that they are surrounded by the water on all sides. When you are underwater, you should not clench and hold your arms against you. You have to relax, allow your body to be open to the water so that it can touch you everywhere. When we do that, the person comes up and they say the blessing, which is the standard blessing for immersion. And the blessing is as follows. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kedishanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu al hatvilah, which means, as we talked about from our blessing unit, blessed are you, Adonai, our God, ruler of the universe, who has made us holy with his commandments and commanded us concerning immersion. The person goes under again, they come up, and then they say the Shehechianu, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, Shehechianu v'kiyamanu v'higiyanu lazman hazeh. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, ruler of the universe, who has given us life, who has sustained us, and allowed us to reach this time. When that has done, the person usually goes under one more time, and they are now Jewish 100% completely. Questions or comments? All right. So let's talk about that status. This can get a little confusing, and we're going to get into politics in a minute, and I'm going to do my best to make sure I'm done in the next 9 minutes. So a convert is equal in all ways to a native-born Jew. They have the same rights and, most importantly, of course, the same responsibilities. The only distinction mentioned in the Torah is the prohibition on marrying Kohanim, the Kohens. Now, this was based in the ancient world on the assumption that all women raised among idolaters were sexually promiscuous. And that was a fairly reasonable assumption in many parts of the ancient world where there was Judaism. In 1961, the Conservative Movement's Committee on Jewish Law and Standard accepted a tshuva, an official piece on this topic, that in our days, this assumption is no longer valid. We do not assume that non-Jews are any more sexually promiscuous than we are. Thus, Kohanim can marry converts in the conservative movement. The Orthodox do not allow it still, but in the conservative movement, yes, we do. And this position was reaffirmed in a follow-up piece in 1996. In the state of Israel, it's complicated. And as I always have to say every year, this is the current state of the situation in Israel. It can change tomorrow, next month, next year, 10 years from now, because this is a political policy, not a religious policy. So at the moment, for the moment, no guarantees for tomorrow that it won't get better or it won't get worse. Somebody who converts outside of Israel will be eligible for aliyah, that is to say, to immigrate to Israel and become a citizen. Now, they might face additional paperwork and they might face additional scrutiny. And depending upon the bureaucrat working with you, this could be more or less problematic. But with concerted effort, a person can push through and become accepted. However, they will most likely not be registered as officially Jewish according to the official record keeping. So they are allowed to immigrate, they are allowed to become a citizen, and they have the rights of citizenship. But in the eyes of the rabbinic court, what's called the rabbanut, they will not be treated as somebody who is Jewish. Only people who convert under a very narrow list of very particular Orthodox rabbis that are abroad are accepted as Jewish according to the rabbanut. So this means that the status of a convert, or indeed the status of a person who is Jewish by birth but cannot prove it to the satisfaction of the rabbanut, is very complicated in Israel itself. The person is a citizen, they have the rights, they can vote, they pay taxes, they serve in the military, but when it comes time to marry, they cannot marry a Jewish person in Israel. They usually go to Cyprus in order to have the marriage ceremony done in a secular setting and then return, or with a Jewish ceremony by a rabbi in Cyprus, but then return. Other issues can be complicated regarding adoption or with regards to other personal status issues like burial. So that is the way it currently sits. It might get better. There has recently been a Supreme Court decision in Israel regarding whether there will be the ability to do conversions inside Israel. At the moment, up until now, it has only been allowed by pre-approved state official rabbis from the ultra-Orthodox sects. It is possible that now the Supreme Court's latest decision will force them to accept conversion by other denominations within Israel. But I'm waiting for that to actually happen, because just because it was said by the Supreme Court of Israel doesn't mean the actual politicians will follow through on that. Israel has complicated politics. That's the short answer. If you have a particular interest in more information about this, please let me know, and I'll be happy to set up a time when we can talk about it in more detail. So let's finish more on the positive note, however, of what their status is vis-a-vis in the eyes of God, which should therefore be the eyes of the community. God greatly loves the proselyte, the Old English word for convert. I wanted to make sure you saw it so that you'd know it if you came across it in a book. God loves those who convert. To what may this be compared? Beautiful parable. To a king who had a flock of sheep. Once a deer came in with the flock. He joined the goats and grazed with them. The king was told, a certain deer has joined the flock and is grazing with them every day, right? He's not a goat, but there he is. The king loved him, loved the deer. When he went out into the field, the king gave orders. Let him have good pasture as he likes. No man shall beat him. Take care of him. They said to him, Master, you have so many rams, so many sheep, and you say nothing to us about them. But with regards to this deer, you instruct us every day, right? Why the special affection for the deer? The king said to them, the sheep, whether they want to or not, such is their way, to graze in the field all day. The deer sleep in the desert, and it is not their way to enter into human settlements. Should we not be grateful to this one who has abandoned all the great wide desert where all the animals live and came to be in our yard? Right, this deer, by the way, it's probably a gazelle in biblical Hebrew. The word that is now thought of as deer is most likely a type of gazelle or antelope, not a deer like Bambi, but more of a deer that is more native to Israel. That's why it's referring to them living in the desert, like the wild antelopes and gazelles of Israel. So it could have been anywhere in the world. It did not need to come within our fence. It did not need to come within our fold, but it chose to. And that is a beautiful thing. Similarly, should we not be grateful to the convert who abandoned his family and father's home? In the ancient world, of course, you would be kicked out and cut away from your family as they rejected you. And unfortunately, still in our own days, I have had people who became Jewish that lost contact with their family because their family refused to accept their conversion. So they left what they had, and they left his people and all the peoples of the world and came to be with us. And in Judaism, we recognize and respect those who have made that decision, and we embrace them and hold them dearly, that a person has chosen to attach themselves voluntarily to Judaism and to embrace it as their path. And for that, I'm very grateful. It's one of the reasons why I enjoy doing these classes, knowing that there are many people who are looking and seeking for Judaism and being able to share that with them. So I hope everybody has a wonderful evening. I need to go to my next meeting. Please email or text or use WhatsApp if you have additional questions or comments. And I look forward to talking again next week.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you, Rabbi.